What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, and today we are going to be talking about the mysterious disappearance of Zachary Michael Cole Bernhardt. There was a disappeared episode about this case called About a Boy, and I believe it was season 8, episode 8. 28-year-old Leah Hackett was a single mother to her son, Zachary Bernhardt, when he went missing from Clearwater, Florida on September 10th, 2000. Now, sometimes it says the 10th and sometimes the 11th because it actually happened in the middle of the night between the 10th and the 11th. So technically, he went missing on September 11th, 2000, but some sources state September 10th. By all accounts, the mother and son had a very close-knit relationship, a very tight bond. They spent a lot of time together. People always talked about what a wonderful mother Leah was, at least in her family. At the time, Leah and Zach were living in a 2-bedroom apartment in the Savannah Trace apartment complex in Clearwater, Florida. And while the two lived alone, they did have a lot of Leah's family surrounding them in the immediate and surrounding areas who would pitch in and help with Zach pretty much any chance they got. Just because they lived alone in the apartment doesn't mean they were alone in life. They had a lot of family around them. Many of these family members who were very close to Leah and Zach stated that she was not only his mother, but his best friend too. And she was really good at deciphering when it was time to be mom and when it was time to be his best friend. Like, she had that balancing act down pat, and kind of jealous of that. Leah was single for most of Zachary's life, except for maybe an occasional boyfriend here and there. And it's said that Zachary was witness to some domestic violence that had taken place from an ex-boyfriend against Leah at least once, but that there was no man who had ever come into Leah's life who played any sort of father figure kind of role model type role in Zach's life. As far as Zach knew, Leah was his mom and his dad. She wasn't bringing these men in to help her raise her son. Like, that was what she wanted to do by herself. She was happy being a single mother. And we find out later that she actually chose to be a single mother. Leah worked a long string of dead-end jobs just to try to make ends meet and to keep food on the table for her and Zach. There were times when Leah couldn't keep steady employment and therefore couldn't keep a roof over her and Zach's heads, but it was kind of always going to be okay because she had her mother, her sisters, her nieces, her, nephews, all of Zach's cousins and aunts, and there was just this whole big network of family that would take them in and surround them with love and who would just help when needed. The way the disappeared episode kind of explained the dynamic was that young Zachary had become, quote, the heart of the family. And this was mainly because he was one of the youngest in a group of many cousins. Most of those cousins were girls, and they were always fawning over the little ones, one of whom was Zachary. And he was one of the only boys, one of the babies. So they were always playing dress up with him. And Leah's sister, Billie Joe, in the interview said that Zachary would have no problem with putting on a dress and, going all out for these dress-up games and singing and dancing. He was just an absolute joy to be around. He really loved to make everyone laugh. I personally really got a kick out of some of the clips that they played, at least in the disappeared episode of Zach, like the home movies. The kid was a character. Leah and Zachary lived very close to the gorgeous white sand beaches that are in Clearwater, Florida. And Zachary absolutely loved the ocean. He loved the water. He was a Sagittarius and just bursted with fire and energy. He was able to swim at a very young age and was even reported to have loved making sandcastles, and he would make them like really intricate. He loved building things. His Aunt Billie Joe said that she always knew that he would have been an architect when he got older, because he would love to take things apart and put them back together. Leah's younger cousins and nieces said that Leah was, quote, the cool aunt, end quote, and this was because when they would go by her house for a sleepover, she would let them stay up late and drink soda and have junk food and watch scary movies, and she was just cool, and she let them hang out and didn't really put many rules on them. Not that they were doing anything really bad, but you guys know the cool aunt. I'm the cool aunt in my family. Leah's sister, Billy Joe, had joked that the reason that Leah would let these kids stay up so late is because she wanted company, because Leah had just gotten a job working the overnight shift at a local telemarketing company, and she would be up all night. So on her days off and her nights off, she would still stay up all night because she wouldn't change her schedule just for one night, and then it would mess up, her work schedule. So she was up anyways, and that's going to be important coming into what may or may not have happened to Zach. Leah and Zach had been living in the Savannah Trace apartments for about a year at this time, and Leah had been working this telemarketing job pretty much for about the same amount of time. When she would go to work, a neighbor would keep an eye on Zach while he slept. I think he went to the neighbor's house and went to sleep. I don't really know like the dynamic or if he slept in his house and the neighbor stayed, but I know that while Leah was at work, he was under the care of someone in a neighboring apartment. Zachary's grandmother and Leah's mother, Carol Bernhardt, did state that the reason Leah chose to work the overnight shift was because she was a single mom. The pay differential was so great that she really couldn't turn it down. So to work the overnight shift, she made a lot more money, and that was money she would bring in to support her son. So Leah would sleep during the day while Zach was at school, and at night while he would sleep, the neighbor would watch him. She would go to work, and this is how it would go. And on her nights off, she would stay up while Zach slept. On Sunday, September 10th, 2000, Leah had the night off and was just spending a nice, relaxing, quiet evening with her 8-year-old son. She cooked his favorite meal. They watched movies together. They were having a mother-son kind of evening and just doing things that they enjoyed doing together. While watching movies on the couch at around 11 p.m., Zachary asked Leah if he could sleep in her bed that night, and Leah said no problem, and she brought him into the bed and helped him get all settled, kind of tucked him in and gave him a kiss. And then she went out into the living room to go on the internet, to read some magazines, to read a book, to finish watching her movie. These were all the things she did throughout the course of the night while Zachary was sleeping and while she was waiting to go to sleep when the sun came up. Keep in mind that the account of what happened in that apartment that night comes from Leah, and later on people would say that she knew more than she had let on. We'll get to all of that, but just know that the only eyewitness, the only person who knows anything about what went on that night is Leah. So this all comes from what she reported to police. According to Leah, it was around 1 a.m. when she decided to take the garbage out and bring it to the dumpsters that were in the apartment complex. For whatever reason, she stated that she had to get into her car and drive the garbage over to the dumpster. Maybe it was just far away. Maybe it was just a big complex. After she returned from bringing the garbage to the dumpsters, Leah got bored and decided to go for a swim in the communal pool that was there for the Savannah Trace apartment complex residents. Before she went for this swim, she said that she did go and check on Zachary to assure that he was okay, and he was fine. She then proceeded to walk downstairs, leave the door wide open, and jump in the pool with nothing but the shorts and t-shirt she was wearing. She brought no towel, no swimsuit, and she had never gone night swimming before, and even later admitted that she didn't even particularly like swimming and almost never swam in the pool, let alone in the middle of the night. Why did she leave the door open? We'll get to that. So she checked on Zach between 3 and 4 and then went for this swim. Zach was sound asleep in her bed at this time, according to Leah. She also didn't take her keys with her and left the apartment door not just unlocked, but open. She headed down the steps, dove into the pool, swam from one side to the other, got out, went back upstairs. She liked to keep the air condition blazing cold in the summertime, and I do that too. So when she walked in soaking wet in her clothes with no towel to dry off on, she was really, really cold. So she went into her bedroom, into the bathroom that was in there, and decided to take a warm, hot shower. She did that immediately upon re-entering the apartment. Leah also later stated that Zachary's tiny little dog was right at the front door and wasn't barking incessantly, wasn't alerting to anything having been wrong at the time when she came back in and decided to go right to the shower. Now, I want you to keep in mind and kind of try and picture this. Zachary is sleeping in Leah's bed in her bedroom. They're living in a 2-bedroom apartment in an apartment complex. Leah walks through her bedroom into the bathroom that's in her bedroom to get to the shower, but she doesn't notice if Zachary's on the bed or not. She can't say if Zachary was there when she came up, like immediately from getting out of the pool when she first came in. She can't say. She didn't notice he was gone until after she showered. When she walked out of the bathroom and looked at the bed, he wasn't there. And she said at first, because he was so skinny, she thought he had kind of slid in the little gap between the wall and her bed, which I totally understand. I have to put a big blanket between that gap so my son doesn't fall through. But she quickly realized that he was not in the little gap. He wasn't under the bed, and he was nowhere in the apartment. So on September 11th, 2000, at around 4 o'clock in the morning, this is when Leah finally realizes that Zach isn't there. So the main question here is, did something happen to him? Did he disappear? Was he taken? Did he walk off? Whatever happened, did it happen while Leah was swimming in the pool and she just didn't notice he was missing? Or did it happen while she was in the shower? We don't know. And neither does she, because she can't remember if she it didn't register whether he was on the bed or not when she went in for the shower. The last time Leah remembers seeing her son is when she reportedly checked on him before 3 o'clock when she was heading downstairs to take the impromptu swim. Leah was obviously immediately very panicked, very concerned. She got dressed right away and looked through the entire apartment. She looked through the entire apartment complex. She went over to the neighbor who would babysit Zachary and just started banging on the doors and windows until finally they answered. And she asked, like, did Zach wander over here? Maybe he had woken up while she was downstairs swimming and got nervous or scared and went to this neighbor's house because he was familiar with the neighbor. However, the neighbor was like, no, we haven't seen him. I feel like maybe this was just like a panicked thing to do, because don't you think the neighbor would have contacted Leah like, hey, it's 3 or 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning and your son's over here knocking on my door. Like, what are you doing? But you know, you're grasping at that point, I'd imagine, because thank God I don't know personally how this would feel, but I've seen enough cases where it's like they're grasping for just anything that even is impossible to be true because they can't bear what's actually happening. Does that make sense? At 4:47 a.m. on Monday, September 11th, 2000, Leah Hackett called the Clearwater Police Department and reported her 8-year-old son as missing. This is just a heads up. You guys know how I like to insert my opinions and little things that kind of struck me wrong. And I just wanted to say that I noticed right from the door, which I thought was strange. And if you disagree, let me know in the comments. But as always, let me know why you disagree politely. In the 911 call, Leah states, quote, I can't find my son, end quote. And when she explains how she went to the pool and checked on him right before, the dispatcher asked her if she had left the door unlocked when she went for the late night swim. And she replied, quote, yes, it's my fault. He was the best behaved little boy ever, end quote. I don't know why that made the hair on the back of my neck and the hair on my arm stand up. I can't tell you why, but I can tell you that that's what happened when I heard her say that. Like when I heard with my own ears the 911 call over and over again, that's what happened to me. I had a physical reaction to her saying, it's my fault. He was the best behaved little boy ever. It just struck me as off. So Clearwater police responded within 10 minutes of the 911 call and immediately started searching the perimeter. They put up the crime scene tape. They made the perimeter and started doing the grid searches as best they could at, 4:45, 5 o'clock in the morning. Leah first called her sister, Billy Joe, and somehow, I don't know if Billy Joe lived with the mother or if Billy Joe called the mother Carol, but Billy Joe and Carol jumped into one car and took what Billy Joe described as, quote, the longest drive of my life to this day, end quote. Billy Joe said Leah immediately collapsed into her and Carol's arms and through sobs explained that Zach had gone missing and the police were sending out search teams in the area to try and locate him. So this was serious stuff now. News media showed up to the apartment complex almost as quickly as the police did, and this is very unusual, I think, for the news media to swarm like this the first night, but I'm glad that they did. It's always really good when that happens, when they're giving the attention to the case right away. And those first few hours, as we all know, are the most important. Leah's apartment was filled with police officers, searchers, forensic teams, volunteers, neighbors, some family members, and she was speaking to the police. The lead detective asked Billy Joe if she would mind bringing Leah down to the station to be formally interviewed, because he didn't want to put Leah in the back of a police car with all of the news reporters there, because he didn't want it to look like Leah was being arrested when really he just needed to get her initial statement of what had happened that night. So Leah and Billy Joe went down to the police station for Leah to give her statement and speak with the investigators. But Leah's mother, Carol, said that she was not leaving that apartment until they brought her grandson home. I mean, I know police try to formally interview, in this case, the parent or the parents or whoever the witnesses as quickly as possible while the information is still fresh in their head. So I can kind of see why they immediately wanted to do that. But I think it's, was really nice of them to kind of think of her and her reputation going forward in the case, which is kind of ironic when you think about what detectives actually think happened, which we'll talk about later. The detectives immediately began processing the apartment as a crime scene, and they were making sure to preserve anything that could even be remotely considered evidence, possible evidence. Admittedly, there wasn't much. The investigators did DNA processing, latent fingerprint processing, extensive collections of all different items, which may or may not have ended up being relevant to the case. So there was DNA from an unidentified male found in the apartment. The lead detective said nobody really knew what was going on yet or really had any kind of idea because they hadn't yet interviewed the mother. They hadn't yet conducted any kind of interviews with anybody, neighbors, family, friends, whoever. But they did know that there was no sign of forced entry, no sign of a struggle. There was no blood spatter on anything which would lead someone to believe that a crime had been committed. The surrounding area of the apartment complex would prove quite difficult to search. There were deep woods and wetlands and the type of geography which Florida is pretty much famous for, am I right? The searches would require groups of people working together in clusters. The terrain wasn't for a single person to be able to just traverse through it alone. Like, you had to literally be holding on to somebody. The fire department, the marina searchers, and then the Tampa Police Department loaned them some air support. And all of these things were utilized to help in the initial search of the surrounding areas and the immediate areas of Zachary Bernhardt, the last place he was seen in that apartment. The FBI even got involved very early on, but the absolutely massive search effort yielded no sign at all of the young boy. I mean, they pretty much knew right from the door that this was some kind of abduction, or at least they felt like that was what the most logical possibility was that this boy had been abducted. He was 8 years old. He was really smart. Probably he didn't walk off, So unless the mother did something to him, which they hadn't even really spoken to her yet or gotten her story, so they weren't assuming that right off the bat. They were thinking she left the door unlocked and left the residence and left an innocent, sleeping 8-year-old boy wearing nothing but boxers laying in a bed like some kind of bait for, a crazy eyes. Even tracking dogs, the scent sniffing dogs, couldn't find any trace of Zachary leaving that apartment. I would love to know if they ever brought cadaver dogs in there. While all of this was going on back at the apartment and surrounding areas, Leah was at the Clearwater Police Station talking to the lead detective on the case, Detective Daniel Slaughter. Slaughter stated that Leah was forthcoming with her information about the timeline of events leading up to when she noticed Zachary was gone from her bed. Keeping in mind how the majority of disappearances of young kids often end with a non-custodial parent being the one to carry out the abduction, Detective Slaughter immediately asked Leah about Zachary's biological father. And Leah had not told most people who the father was, and she was very reluctant to even talk to the detective about this guy, and this guy's name was never given. Detective Slaughter called him up, and not only did the guy want nothing to do with Zach or Leah, didn't really care that Zach was missing, he admitted that he didn't even know that he had a son with Leah. So she had kept this from this guy for whatever reason. and the police ruled him out almost immediately because he was nowhere in the Florida area at the time of the disappearance. The detectives eventually sent Leah home after just a few hours to let her get some rest. So I need you to keep in mind here, in case you haven't gathered this, that the detectives right from the door are very suspicious of Leah's recounting of events. A lot of the information and the timeline just didn't make sense to them, like why Leah, who admittedly didn't swim in the pool much at all, and never before had gone for a random swim in the middle of the night, and who didn't bring a towel, who just wore her plain clothes that she was already wearing, had decided to leave the door unlocked. Like, she states that she just decided on a whim to go to the pool. Why didn't she lock the door and just bring her keys with her? It just doesn't add up. How did she not notice if Zach was there or not? How big do you think these bedrooms are in a big apartment complex like this, even a 2-bedroom? How big can the bedroom possibly be? Now, my master bedroom is pretty big, and you have to walk through the master bedroom, obviously, to get to the master bathroom. Even with my bedroom being as big as it is, I would notice immediately if my son was in the bed. I don't know. I don't understand how, in what was probably a very small bedroom, she did not notice if her son was or wasn't still sleeping on the bed when she came up from the pool. And this was the main question investigators had as well. How did she not notice? It was like the way the room was supposedly set up was that she would have had no choice but, as soon as she walked into the door, to be looking at the bed. So why didn't it register to her that Zachary wasn't there until after she already came out of the shower? I just don't, that's one thing that kind of tickles my brain that I just can't get around. I don't know what to believe about Leah or about this case. I really don't. I go back and forth like I do on most things because I always want to give people the benefit of the doubt. But this one detail just blows my mind. Detectives said immediately after speaking to Leah that night that her story, quote, just didn't add up, end quote. This brings us to day 2 of the search for Zachary Bernhardt, and nobody was finding anything. The younger cousins were given flyers to go and pass out around Clearwater on foot, and the adults in the family and friends were joining the volunteers to help do the ground searches. Leah went in again to be formally questioned by Detective Slaughter, and Detective Slaughter at this point isn't sure whether or not he believes Leah. She went over her timeline of the night Zachary disappeared again with him and insisted that she had no idea what could have happened to Zach, that she's just as clueless as everybody else. Basically, it doesn't make much sense to her either, and she knows how it sounds, but it's the truth. The truth is the truth is the truth. And I must say, after all of these years, her story still remains the same and consistent. Is that because it's a well-versed lie? I don't know. Usually people who aren't criminal masterminds slip up at some point. But moving on. Detective Slaughter also had a major problem with Leah's demeanor while he was formally questioning her about this tragic event. Like, one of the most, if not the most tragic things that could happen to a parent, a mother, a single mother, right? He said she would be crying and very emotional one minute, and then the next minute she'd be cracking a joke. And he said her behavior was sometimes, quote, inappropriate, end quote, for the situation at hand. And he said it would flip like a switch. Now, I don't know. It does sound odd to me, but at the same time, I have no idea how I would act. I tend to get giggly when I'm nervous. I tend to try to still be that friendly person even when I'm in distress. But I don't know, you know, the distress of losing my child, literally losing them. I don't know that I would be Miss Buddy Buddy. I think I would be devastated and distraught, and I probably would not be cracking jokes. But I don't know. I don't know Leah personally, and her family did not comment on whether or not this was normal behavior for her. So they were having a real problem and kept getting stuck on the questions I previously mentioned. Like, why did she decide randomly out of nowhere to go for a swim without a towel in her clothes? Why did she leave the door open and unlocked? How did she not notice if Zach was in the bed? The same thing I mentioned multiple times already. When asked what made her go for that random dip in the pool with no towel, no swimsuit, and what made her leave the door unlocked, no less, she replied, quote, "Yeah, I don't know why I did that," end quote. She even went so far as to say that she didn't even like swimming in general, let alone in the pool in the middle of the night. So you can see how the investigators are saying that there's no reasonable explanation for some of the things Leah admitted she had done and that had occurred the night of Zachary's disappearance. The media was also swarming and questioning friends, family, neighbors. They hadn't been able to question Leah yet, so they were questioning the next best thing. Other people in the apartment complex, previous neighbors, so-called friends, acquaintances, family members, everybody they can get their hands on except Leah. They were asking things like who she was as a person, how was she as a mother, what kind of parent was she, you know, the kinds of things the media asks when something like this happens. After all, Leah was the last person to see Zachary before he disappeared and possibly died or was killed. We still don't know. So, of course, they wanted to know about her past and her and Zachary's past. The information that came out really did not do Leah any favors. And please know, as you all should if you know me, I am not judging, okay? I think that judging the parent or coming to a rush to judgment too soon and doing things like this, like the media are asking about Leah, you know, trying to get negative or bad information on her, takes the focus off of the missing child, off of the missing person. So now it's going to become about, did Leah do it because she has this in her past, that in her past, instead of what could have possibly happened. Let's follow the evidence, which again, there really was none. In my personal opinion, even if the mother or a parent or whoever was the last person to see someone before they disappear without a trace, I don't think it's fair to look at a person's past. The past to me just isn't relevant, you know, in my current situation, really. If something like that happens, what's relevant is what happened that night, maybe the night before, leading up to the disappearance. Not what happened, you know, before Zach was even born, or, you know, everybody goes through hard times, especially single moms. And I'm not trying to defend Leah because I don't know if she did something to Zach, but I don't like that her past is going to be kind of used against her here. She was a single mother struggling to make ends meet. Neighbors and friends who spoke with the press talked about multiple evictions in Leah's past. And in fact, she was allegedly about to be evicted from the Savannah Trace apartment complex as well when Zach went missing. They talked about late nights out at bars. They talked about possible drug use, breakups, violent relationships with many men. People were also saying, and I don't know who people are, that's just what I read. People were reporting, quote, Leah and her son had moved 11 times in 14 years. This is what annoys me. How did an 8-year-old boy move 11 times in 14 years? But this is the kind of thing that people do to try to wreck someone else's character, even if they had moved 11 times in the 8 years since Zach had been born. She was a single mom. She was doing the best that she could. And the reason I feel confident saying this is because a lot of her family still defends her. And a lot of relatives, a lot of neighbors, a lot of her friends did come forward and talk about no matter what else she could be accused of, no matter what else she ever did with her life, she was an amazing, attentive, incredibly loving, caring, and kind mother to that little boy. And I want to believe that. I really want to believe that she isn't culpable. So all of these kind of negative reports were making Leah look like a less than quality person, right? Like a person of poor morals, just a poor quality person. And that's not fair, in my opinion. For the most part, Leah's nieces and sisters and most of her family, not all of them, but most, really did not like how the media was portraying Leah. And her one niece told of how when she would go out to do something with Leah in town after Zach went missing, people would like spit at Leah. They would call her a murderer. they would yell things to her like, what'd you do with Zach? And where's Zach? Tell us where Zach is. And like harass her and get to the point where she was almost assaulted in public multiple times. That's just unacceptable. We have a system in this country called innocent until proven guilty. And it's bad enough that the majority of the time, the justice system doesn't treat people that way. I'll save that for Hot Mess Recovery. Moving on. On September 13th, 2000, the media basically camped out in front of Leah's apartment complex. She finally went in front of the cameras and did the plea for Zach's safe return in front of all of the news cameras locally. Neighbors and people who lived in the same apartment complex just kept giving story after story after story, casting Leah in a bad light to both the media and to the investigators in charge of the case. One thing that really stood out to me, though, was how many of these people in the complex reported either seeing and or hearing Leah's car leaving the complex that night and returning several times between 3 and 4 a.m. in the early morning hours of September 11th when Zachary went missing. There was more than a handful of eye and ear witnesses who, again, heard her getting into her car, leaving the complex, and coming back. It could never be proven or disproven. She says she took the car the one time for like a less than 5-minute trip to drive the garbage from her parking spot to the dumpsters, and then she drove back, got out of her car, went upstairs, and checked on Zach or did whatever she did. So there were no surveillance cameras in this apartment complex parking lot, I guess. Or if there were, for some reason, the investigators didn't get a hold of them. I don't know, but they said that they could not confirm or deny this, that she did this. But it did plant more suspicion on her. Leah fired back that she had already admitted that she started her car the one time to bring the garbage to the dumpster. She did not restart it and leave multiple times, and she also did not leave the apartment complex. Although they weren't able to confirm these reports, these eye and ear witnesses of her doing this, it did lead to more speculation among people and between the investigators, and it gave them a bit more ammo to kind of wonder why her story wasn't adding up. It basically made her look like she was being less than truthful, which investigator Slaughter specifically thought from the very beginning anyway. On September 28th, so about 17 days after Zach was reported as missing, the police told a local newspaper that they believe that Leah Hackett knows more than she's saying, and they don't feel that she's giving the whole story. Detective Slaughter said, quote, "We weren't in a position to be able to say Leah was culpable, but there were reasons for us to believe that she wasn't telling us everything," end quote. He said they basically had to do this because they wanted the public to know that they were doing their due diligence in the situation, but that they just didn't have enough of the story to be able to make any real headway in finding Zach. And that kind of annoyed me. Like, you guys know me, little things like this, I kind of just pick at them and they kind of pick in my brain, right? So they come up with nothing after all of this time, and there's a community who's scared and a public who wants answers. So people are screaming for action and justice. So what do you do as an investigator? Well, obviously, you let the media know that only if the mother were giving all of the information, then you would have gotten somewhere in this case. It just sounded to me, that quote and the way that he said it, hearing him say it myself with my own ears, that he was basically blaming the lack of progress, the lack of evidence, the lack of any forward movement or momentum in this disappearance was solely because Leah wasn't telling the whole truth. Kind of like, you know, we're doing our job. After a few months had passed, Leah had already moved from the apartment complex where Zach went missing from, but law enforcement asked her to come back and walk them through exactly what happened that night to show them everyone's movements right there in person, which she did. Leah's account during this walkthrough did not change one little bit. Her description of what happened that night was exactly the same as it was the night that Zachary went missing when she first spoke to the police. So every time thereafter that she's questioned or spoken to, she tells the exact same story, right down to every little detail, which, like I said earlier, some people think this is because it's a practice and well-versed lie, and other people think that it's because the truth is the truth, and, you know, the truth stays the same. The case went cold eventually, and Leah moved away from Clearwater and decided that she wasn't going to participate in the investigation into Zachary's disappearance anymore. That means she wasn't talking to the press. She wasn't talking to the investigators anymore. She decided, my son's gone. I'm wiping my hands with it. I can't take anymore. As a mother, I don't understand how you could ever do that. And that really makes me want to start judging Leah, and it makes me want to, just like I think it did for a lot of people, wonder, what is she so worried about the police finding? Did she do something? Was she on drugs and something happened to Zach? You know, I don't know. But I thought that was really effed up that she just gave up on the search for her son after a short period of time, too. I'm talking like within the first 2 years, possibly before that. Right around this time, when Leah decided to not participate anymore, a local business in Clearwater eventually offered a $5,000 reward for information on this case leading to Zachary, or information as to what happened to him. And because of this, Zachary's disappearance finally makes national news and headlines. The Clearwater police received hundreds of calls and investigated every single one of them, but none of them led anywhere near finding out what happened to Zachary Bernhardt. 8 months after Zachary Bernhardt disappeared in the spring of 2001, investigators received tip number 741 from a confidential informant who relayed this information to his handler at the Clearwater Police Department. According to the informant, a Florida man named Kevin Jalbert was constantly boasting about the horrific things he had done to little children, specifically young boys. This led an undercover officer to initiate contact with Jalbert, who everyone was fairly certain at this point that at the very least he was an extremely sick individual who had some dark and disturbing fantasies, but at most they were wondering if he could have had anything to do with whatever happened to Zachary Bernhardt less than a year earlier. So after getting close to becoming friends with and pretending to have similar interests as Kevin Jalbert, Jalbert finally opens up to this officer and tells him a story. He's recounting this story to the undercover officer, driving around, joyriding, just thinking they're both just a couple of buddies out cruising for young boys. Jalbert thought the undercover officer was his close friend and someone who shared these same disgusting and despicable interests in pedophilia and such. So he thinks they're out looking for a young boy to kidnap while on this joyride. And Kevin decides to open up. He brags about kidnapping, raping, and torturing young boys the whole ride, and the undercover officer realizes Jalbert is very serious about, at least about his intent to that night kidnap and do these things to a young boy while the undercover is in the vehicle. He even brought with him a funnel and some bleach, and he said it was to clean up any evidence that may be left behind after they do this to a random young boy. Eventually, after driving for a little while with the undercover officer riding shotgun, pulled into the apartment complex, the Savannah Trace Apartments. He then starts describing to the undercover what he called his most recent kidnapping. And they're sitting in the parking lot of the apartment complex of the Savannah Trace Apartments. And he says that he kidnapped a young blonde boy from there about a year earlier. He describes the kidnapping and all that other stuff I mentioned of the young boy, and eventually the young boy's murder, that he said it was a young blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy that he took from an apartment where the door was open and the child was sleeping in bed. However, he did point to the wrong apartment, and he said that the young boy was wearing Mickey Mouse underwear and Zachary Bernhardt was wearing boxer shorts at the time, which I don't think were Mickey Mouse. So the police decided that he was just kind of boasting and making things up. Perhaps he had seen the Zachary Bernhardt case. It got national attention just recently. and decided to try to make himself look cool to someone who he thought shared the same interest by stating that he had done that kidnapping. But I don't know. I mean, could it be that he was in a rush? I mean, he was kidnapping this child for these nefarious and horrific purposes and intents. And I mean, does he remember which apartment? Maybe he figured it doesn't matter which apartment. He just point to that one and tell the story. I don't know. I think this guy could still have something to do with it. But the police did a very thorough investigation, according to them, and vetted him as a suspect. He is not a suspect, and they're very confident in their decision that he is not involved in any way, shape, or form with the disappearance of Zachary Bernhardt. They do think that he's done some other pretty terrible things, but being involved with Zachary's disappearance is not one of them. This guy, I just want to say, is the worst kind of human being doing these terrible and horrible, I don't have the words to describe how I feel about people like this who hurt innocent, defenseless, and helpless little kids and babies. I personally think, like I said, enough details were given that he should have been investigated a little bit more. But again, I don't know the extent, obviously, of the Clearwater Police Department's investigation into this guy. I mean, I just know that they said they cleared him, so they could have done a very thorough investigation for all I know. In my own opinion, though, sorry, and then I'll move on. In my own opinion, though, it's like what the boy was wearing and which apartment were probably such trivial things to him. I mean, is it really reasonable for us to expect him to remember that almost a year later? The guy was a drug addict as well. I mean, so I don't know. I don't know. That's just my 2 cents. It won't make you any richer, so you can take it or leave it. Jalbert was arrested, though, for solicitation of murder in 2001 from driving around with these things to destroy evidence in the back of his vehicle with an undercover officer who he told they were looking for a boy to kidnap, assault, and murder. Jalbert himself claims that he was just boasting and trying to impress someone who he thought was like-minded, who he thought he could share these sick fantasies with. He said that's all it was just this big fantasy that he had, and you know, nothing more, that everything he had said was a lie. Basically just trying to impress a fellow scumbag. He obviously denies having any part in Zachary's disappearance. He also claimed he was never actually planning on going through with kidnapping, and again stated he was simply trying to impress someone he thought was a friend. A lot of Zach's family, however, including Billy Joe, all believe Jalbert could have been responsible for whatever happened to Zach. They just think it's too much of a coincidence that he pulls into the same apartment complex and points out and says a blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid. But then you have to think, it made national news. It made local news from within an hour of it being reported to 911 by Leah. The news media was there. So could he have just saw that this was a sensationalized story and really was just trying to impress a like-minded scumbag? I don't know. Don't know. So police searched his residence and vehicle and any and all property he was associated with or that he owned. And although they found nothing at all to link him to Zach's disappearance, they did find a receipt to the landfill for only 2 weeks after Zachary had disappeared. And somehow they want to link this as evidence he had in fact been responsible for the abduction. He was never charged with anything involving Zach, though, and investigators claim they searched the landfill quite thoroughly and found no sign of Zach, and that they investigated Jalbert thoroughly and are confident he was not involved in any way with Zach's case, as I think I've already said. Jalbert didn't get off scot-free, however, thank goodness, and was convicted of 60 counts of child pornography and also of solicitation to rape, kidnapping, and murder of a child because he was trying to convince the undercover officer to help him. He was sentenced to more than 40 years in prison. Also worth mentioning, the DNA found at the scene that belonged to an unidentified male did not match Kevin Jalbert's DNA at all. In August of 2001, 1,800 miles from Clearwater, Florida, and right outside of Boulder, Colorado, a photograph was found. It was lying on the ground in the parking lot of a sporting goods store. The image was of a young blonde boy tied up and gagged, laying in some woods somewhere. The photo was turned in immediately to the local police department, and then it was sent out to police departments all over the United States. And when it reached Clearwater, Florida's police department, They were concerned because they said the boy in the picture had enough similarities in his face and features that they believed very much so that it was in fact Zachary Bernhardt. They brought in Zachary's grandmother and aunt Billy Joe and showed it to them to see if they thought or knew whether or not it was Zach in the photo. Billy Joe and the grandmother said they went back and forth with it, but eventually they decided it was not Zach. And his grandmother Carol said that regardless of whether or not it was Zach, having to see a photo of a poor, defenseless, and helpless young boy who resembled her grandson so much, and even just in general in that kind of position, really upset her greatly and kind of made her skin crawl and made her shake and cry, that like the reality again of what possibly and even probably could have happened to her grandson. The realization that she may never see him again started to sink in. So just because the family members said that the picture was not Zach, the police still think that there's enough similarities that it really still could be him. In September of 2001, exactly 1 year to the day that Zach went missing, the family wanted to do a big media push, and they wanted to bring light back onto the case and, you know, get more tips coming in, put Zach's face all over the place again, nationally, even internationally if need be. But the problem is exactly 1 year to the day that Zach was reported missing was September 11th, 2001, which we know is 9/11. So they were not getting any media coverage that day or in the following weeks or in the following months. And if somebody did print something about Zach, it was like this big in the back of the paper somewhere or magazine. Zach's family said that they were unable to get any media outside of Clearwater interested in doing anything about the year anniversary because all of this kind of stuff in Zach's case too were overshadowed by these horrific terrorist attacks. On New Year's Eve of 2001, so going into 2002, another shocking crime was committed at the Savannah Trace apartment complex where Leah and Zachary lived when he disappeared. At around 6:30 in the evening, 3 young boys were playing in the playground, which is a part of the Savannah Trace apartment complex. And when a man pulled up in a white pickup truck and approached the boys offering them ice cream. The youngest of the 3 boys, a 5-year-old, did approach the man for the ice cream while the other 2 young boys were like yelling for him not to do that. In the blink of an eye, the man grabbed the 5-year-old boy and threw him in the truck and took off with him. The other 2 kids went and alerted grown-ups who alerted the authorities. Zach's grandmother and aunt were very hopeful that this wasn't just a coincidence, that perhaps this man was the same man who had kidnapped Zach. And the police thought so too, that this was way too much of a coincidence. But I mean, in my opinion, again, if you look at the differences, this guy snatched this kid in broad daylight in front of witnesses that he can be identified. I mean, whoever took Zach or did whatever to Zach was like a thief in the night, literally. The 5-year-old was found in a dumpster 10 hours after he was already abducted, but the man and the white pickup truck were never found to this day. Because of the victim's young age, he was only 5 years old, it said that he was, quote, hurt, end quote, but did not elaborate on anything that may have happened to him. The boys were able to give a basic description of the suspect in the white pickup truck, and that description was, quote, a white male with stringy hair, end quote. Because stranger abductions are so incredibly rare, the fact that 2 boys were abducted within a little more than a year of each other from the exact same apartment complex by strangers, even though the circumstances couldn't have been more different, did not sit well with Zachary's family or investigators. But the more they researched, like I said, all of the differences, they vetted it out, and they decided that it just was a big coincidence and the cases were not connected. Zachary's family, especially his aunt, Billy Joe, says, well, if they never caught the guy and they never questioned him, then how do they know that he wasn't involved? I don't know. I think the police, in my opinion, got it right on this one. I think there's way too many differences. Like suddenly this person just gets so desperate. I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC, starting 2 years after Zach disappeared, started making age progression photos up until he was a legal adult, and they release these photos every 2 years. The case is still ongoing, and investigators continue to investigate any and all leads that come their way, even though there really aren't many, if any, at this point. No further evidence has been uncovered in his case, and his mother still refuses to do anything at all to help the investigation along, to help her family with media pushes, to do anything. Leah just dropped out of sight and wants nothing to do with even the mention of her son's name. Investigators are still convinced that Leah Hackett, Zach's mother, holds the key and has been withholding information which could be crucial to once and for all solving the mystery of what happened to her innocent 8-year-old son. But for whatever reason, she refuses to come forward with the truth, as they call it. Leah still denies this, and some of her family believes in her and believes her, and some of them do not and think she's hiding something. Some of her sisters, some of her cousins, her family think that she murdered Zach, either purposely or by accident. Others think there's no way possible. It has literally, according to the grandmother, Carol, Zach's grandmother, Leah's mother, destroyed the family. There are sisters who aren't talking to each other, cousins who aren't talking to each other. They fight. They don't do holidays together anymore because there's a side of Leah's perfectly innocent and Leah did something, possibly murdered Zach. And that's really unfortunate, and that's really a shame because this family was so close and so tight-knit. Daniel Slaughter, who is now the chief of police in Clearwater, has stated that while they were never able to fully exclude Leah as having involvement in her son's disappearance that night, they've also never found any evidence other than their gut feeling and the story not adding up to law enforcement to be able to accuse her of anything, formally or otherwise. So that's all I have for you today, guys. Let me know what you think. What are your theories? Do you have any additional information? This is the disappearance of Zachary Bernhardt, and I really want to know what you think. Guys, please give this video a big thumbs up. I would really appreciate it if you wouldn't mind sharing it. I am still stuck between 780 and 800 subscribers, and it's driving me freaking nuts, okay? I love you guys so much. Thank you for bearing with me for my 2-week hiatus. I promise you, I got so much work done. By the way, I dropped off The Missing and the Fae Part 3 to Missing Persons and Mysteries a couple of days ago, so make sure you look out for that over on their channel. And I am doing with Steve Stockton De-Zombified on Wednesday nights from 8 to 9 Eastern Time. We're doing a series called Real Evil. And if you haven't checked that out, go over to De-Zombified or in my playlist of live streams and podcasts and check that out. Come and join us live. It would mean so much to me to see some of your names in there, all of your names in there. And I just really appreciate you guys. Please be sure to check out the description box. I am still not monetized. I cannot get this dang 1,000 subscribers, and I really do not make much. I want to thank my patrons so much for your donations. Every little bit helps. In the description box, you will find a link both to my Patreon and to my PayPal. You can donate either way. Patreon is monthly recurring, and PayPal is a one-time donation. Either way, I will do my best to give you access to Patreon-only content, which, by the way, guys, I should be able to start putting more up now that I have my babysitter issue fixed. So I have a lot more time on my hands to bring better and more quality content and to do a little bit more for my patrons to let you guys know I appreciate you. Please don't forget, there will be links also to Fireside Chat that Steve Stockton and I do on Missing Persons and Mysteries channel every Sunday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Time to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And that's just me and him talking, hanging out with you guys. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Please try and share, recommend my channel, and try to check out some of the live streams that I've been doing as well. Like I said, you'll find links in the description box and links to donate financially to the channel if you are able. Guys, please, I could really use some income coming in from working full-time on this. But if not, I will keep trucking and hopefully get that 1,000 subs very soon. So let me know what you think. Have your best day. Have your best night. Be kind to each other. It doesn't cost anything and can make you feel so good. And when you let your kindness show, it's absolutely beautiful. I love you guys so much, and I can't wait to hear what you think. Bye-bye. Mwah.